Alright, okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to the new week. Okay, so as usual, very quick disclaimer first. Everything we'll be covering over here in today's session solely based on my personal point of view. They do not directly translate to any form of trade signals or investment advisory, okay? Now, with that said, for those of you who are joining in for the first time, welcome. For some of you who are here regularly, welcome back to the new week, okay? The structure that we're going to be doing over here would be very much walking you through some of the key highlights to take note for the market this week, some of the opportunities that you may want to pay attention, right? And we'll have a little bit of a Q&A as well. So if you guys have any questions, just feel free to put it into the chat box, okay? Now, couple of interesting development for today, okay? We did have the yen movement earlier in the afternoon. Okay, but of course, if you kind of look into the Forex Factory event calendar, there's nothing much today, right? But the yen actually moved quite a bit. Later we'll talk a little bit about in the charts. But for this week here, in terms of the planned event, okay, the focus will be very much on the second half of the week, right? Later part of the week, where we have the FOMC statement, okay, coming in Wednesday and Thursday, and then of course on Friday over here we have the NFP because that's going to be the first Friday of the new month, okay. So the very much focus for the week itself, aside from what happened on the yen just now, will be very much on the dollar, and of course if you've been keeping track on the development of what's happening in the US, the Fed, you would have known that at the start of the year we're talking about potentially rate cuts, how many times within this year itself. But since then, the conversation has pivoted. Right now, the conversation is more towards will we even see one cut this year? Okay. So keep an eye. You definitely want to follow the development of things, and any of this shift here, of course, would have an impact in the market too. Okay. So this week, very important part to pay attention is definitely on the development of Federal Reserve. Okay. So if you have any dollar related trades, okay, just factor it in. Usually when we have a high impact news coming in at the end of the week, the start of the week here, the market would likely be a little bit more of a slower side where traders are basically waiting for the news to come in and then make their decision, right? So have that in mind, right, as you're looking at some of the dollar related instruments, okay. So with that said, let me jump over to the charts here. Okay, starting off with the dollar index. So dollar index over here, I'm actually bullish for the short run, right? At least I'm expecting right now for market to make another push higher to retest the high at 106.65. Okay, and of course what we're seeing here is a very corrective move, right? We have impulsive move to the upside. Recent times the market has been doing a corrective move to the downside. So that's basically a retracement, right? And we are expecting one more push back up. So short term here, okay, it may come from the catalyst of NFP or even the Fed for the week itself. So I'm looking at upside. Okay, now that is also translated very nicely in terms of euro dollar. Okay, so if you take a look at euro dollar right now, we have a very nice little move here. Okay, kind of inverse pattern, right? Impulsive drop, corrective move. So we're expecting downside here. Okay, so euro dollar again, that direction bias is very clear. For me to get involved in this particular trade, I'll still need to wait for the setup, right? The direction is clear, the bias is clear, but at the moment I do not have a setup. Okay, and I also understand that going into NFP and FOMC, I want to be a little bit cautious in getting involved in a trade prior to that, because if things doesn't move in my favor before the news, then I would not be able to really manage the trade, right? Because again, news comes out, anything can shift. So I'm also considering that factor. Okay, so right now, euro dollar, clear directional bias, but for me, I would need a little more conviction from the market before committing to the sell trade. Okay, GBP USD over here, I think this week likely we're gonna see some kind of a pullback. Okay, and if we can get a corrective pullback, then obviously I'll be bullish on the pound dollar. Okay, so very clear structure. The market seems to have completed a three-wave move. We see an impulsive move to the upside, a little bit of a crawl here. Okay, so definitely not buying into this, but if we can get a corrective pullback, that was built into a very nice little setup to get one more leg to the upside, right? And I'm interested in that move itself. Okay, so that's on the pound dollar. Aussie dollar is in fact very similar as well. Okay, so we get that impulsive push, a little bit of a crawlish here. So I want to see a corrective move and then we can get a buy. Okay, so GBP USD and Aussie dollar pretty much the same. This week here probably need to be a bit patient. Then we have the dollar Canadian. Okay, kind of flip it the opposite, mirror effect. Then you can see this is impulsive, a little bit of a crawl. So same thing, we're waiting for that corrective pullback. Then we can get the sell nicely, right? So short term here, if you kind of put these pieces together, right? What we have is that short term dollar strength. Okay, and of course that would nicely, if everything aligned, translate to euro dollar coming down, pound dollar coming down in the short run as well, Aussie dollar coming down, and then Canadian going up, right? And after we hit ideally around that 106 area, okay, we may see a deeper pullback in the dollar, and that's where all this would translate nicely, in terms of one more move, right? If everything can align nicely, that would be ideally what we want to see. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the yen. Okay, so you can see very huge volatility earlier today, right? So the market were trading somewhere there, okay, around 158. We had a push up towards close to 160, and the market came all the way down towards 155 area, right? So that's actually almost a 500 pip movement. Okay. It's not usual, and there are a lot of talks about potentially BOJ intervention. Now I can't really confirm that, but I've some friends, I would say one friend, who previously had some contacts with the Bank of Japan, right, Bank of Tokyo, and he did share, right, likelihood that is an intervention, right, and this intervention would likely not be a one-time thing. Really depend on how the market is going to move. So there's a good possibility we're going to see the yen kind of reverse a little bit, right? Which means to the downside. The dollar yen is also building up potentially a nicer setup for me, right? As I mentioned, I think for the past 1 or 2 weeks, when I look at the dollar yen, I'm not interested in upside because I understand that the likelihood of Bank of Japan intervene is very high, right? And I'm interested more towards the downside, and I'm just simply waiting for that to happen. Okay, now looks like if this is gonna be the case, where we get this impulsive move and moving forward, we can get a corrective structure over here, then we can get the sell side, right? And if that's gonna be the first wave of intervention, then I'm not surprised we're gonna get a deeper pullback. Okay, maybe towards some of these key areas over here around 151, 152, right? So the downside is there, okay? But what I want to see right now from here moving forward is a corrective setup. Okay, if I don't get that, then obviously I don't want to force a trade. Okay, so if I get a corrective setup, very nicely built in, we also have the order flow. We have a fair value gap over here, right? And naturally we have the demand the supply at the top, right? The order block at the top. So this can align very nicely. Okay, but this will need some time for the market to build up, right? So we'll see. Okay, then I have XAU USD over here. For me, gold seems to be developing pretty correctively. So if this continue to just develop like that, short term, I will be expecting one more drop to retest the bottom of the channel, maybe before the push up. Okay, so that's my take, right? So gold here, if it's likely going to correctively develop, for the week itself, then the direction here will be looking for the sell side. Okay. Crude oil here as well. Crude oil had a nice little reaction off the 50% fit. I'm bearish bias as well. Okay. I'm looking to actually get involved in this trade here if we can get an impulsive break to the downside. That would be a nice little breakout trade, and my target would be conservative, this low. If I'm using a little bit of Fib, there's a nice confluence of area here as well. Okay, so yeah, that's the direction, right? Right now I'm looking at it from a structure of this is impulsive, this is corrective, so we'll likely get one more push to the downside. Alright, so that's on crude oil. S&P short term, if you can get a corrective move here, I expect one more push, right, to complete this three-wave structure. So short term upside, given we can get a corrective pullback. Okay, so some of this here are pretty clear in terms of the direction and the structure that's developing. Okay, pound yen, odd yen, pretty much nothing there. More or less the same view on the dollar yen. But I'm actually more interested to sell the dollar yen as compared to the pound yen and the Aussie yen. Okay, the reason is because I'm also looking at the Fed, right? So if we kind of get a nice diversion between the policy from the Fed as well as the Bank of Japan, then dollar yen will give us a nicer move. Okay, but having said that, most of the yen pair tends to move similarly. Okay, so of course, if you are more interested in the pound yen or Aussie yen, I think they're fine. Okay, you can look for downside, given we get a corrective pullback. Okay, given we get a corrective pullback. Pound Australia here, likelihood nothing much. With what the market is developing right now, seems like the structure may shift a little bit. Maybe this would just develop into a crawl. Okay. If that's going to be a case, then I'll just be waiting for the crawl to complete itself. And then somewhere here we'll be looking for the buy instead, right? And this will complete the bigger structure. Okay, so time will tell. Probably just give it a little bit of time, see how the market is going to develop, and then we'll see if we have a setup from there later part of this week. Okay, Euro Canadian. If I can get a corrective structure here, then we'll be expecting this to drop another three wave, right? So we have a 1, 2, 3 here, push up, impulsive, drop back down. So this kind of suggests that maybe we're looking at a bigger three-wave structure of a WXY, right? With an internal structure over here, potentially, even looking something like that, right? This may just continue to drop a little bit and wait for the three-wave pullback correction, and then we'll look for one more drop. Okay, so overall, I'm still neutral depending on how the market is going to develop. If this just starts to form a correction here, short term, we can still take this down. Okay, and then after that, maybe the pullback, and then we'll take it again to the downside, right? We'll see how it goes. Okay, that's on Euro Canadian. Bitcoin very quickly right now is testing the 618 pullback. Seems like price has also completed this three wave here. I want to see how the market is going to react off here first, right? I'm not so keen to just buy it immediately, but if I can get an impulsive move up, lower time frame of correction, then that would naturally be a buy trade on Bitcoin. Okay, so what we can see here is potentially this is a three-wave move, mini impulse. If this is a correction, then we expect this to go up. Okay, we'll see. Okay, we need to give it a bit of time, wait for the market to kind of give me that confirmation, and then we'll look for the buy trade to the upside for BTC. Okay, so far from me, I think for the week itself, some of the major pairs seems to be setting up. We need to see moving forward, going into NFP, going into FOMC, how the market is going to develop. And in terms of gold here, same thing. If you can get a sell set up, that will be a potential trade. Crude oil. Okay, this is the only trade that potentially I may get involved in before the FOMC statement and before NFP. Okay, but I would want to keep this trade, I would say manage this trade very actively, because ideally I want price to move substantially towards my direction so that I can shift stops to break even before the Fed, FOMC, and NFP. Okay, because again, understand that news itself creates volatility, and it can go either direction, right? And I wouldn't want to risk a trade potentially going into the news itself, right? So we'll see. Ideally, again, this should come down nicely prior to that, and then hopefully maybe even exiting the trade with profits right before the news itself. Okay, so those are some of the things that I have. Okay, very quickly, just scan through some of the index over here. This is the China A50. Right. Seems like we may have potentially completed a bigger structure to the upside. Okay. So right now over here, you may want to be a little bit cautious in buying. Let's just pull this in. Seems to have completed there as well, kind of coming close to that. Yeah, right. So I would say you want to be cautious on this. Likelihood is we may see some kind of a pullback here. If it's going to be corrective, you can still look for it upside. But if the pullback here starts to be impulsive in nature, then you don't want to be buying it up, right? Okay. So you need a little bit of time because what we have here is just basically an impulse push, right? Hang Seng more or less the same as well. Probably need to give it a little bit of time, right? Okay. Yeah, basically you can see this as a corrective structure completion. Okay, and you kind of get an impulsive move, right? So you want to wait for the corrective pullback. Most of the time, it's likely going to come back around that 50% mark. Okay, if you can get a corrective pullback, then it will be a bullish push to the upside. Okay. German DAX looks pretty neat as well. Seems like it's developing the three-way structure right now. Right, so if this comes down again correctively, that will be a nice little buy opportunity. Okay, but I think this one here probably not going to be something within the week itself, right? But seems like it's developing quite nicely. Okay, Australia index seems the opposite. Okay, if this gonna turn out something like that, yeah, if that's gonna turn out something like that, then you'll be expecting some kind of a push down, right? But short term, you can maybe get involved in the buy if that's something you want to look into. Okay. Okay, nothing much on this. Anything, let's see. Okay, FTSE looks very much like the pound dollar. Okay, in terms of the pattern, we have this push up, this looks crawlish. So wait for a corrective pullback in terms of FTSE, right? Okay, so nothing much there for you to trade this week. Okay. Yeah, so those are some of the index, right? Hopefully those are clear. Question here I see from Dio very quickly is on the euro dollar. You said that don't have a setup, assuming that the order flow setup. What about Elliott wave setup? Right now, if you look at this here, the only setup that potentially may be valid for me is a breakout sell. Okay, but I'm looking at it from a perspective. If I'm gonna sell this breakout here, the risk reward is not gonna be worthwhile. Okay, slightly less than 1:2. Not something I'll be very interested in terms of the risk to reward ratio. But that's a valid setup to me. Just that the risk to reward ratio is not going to be worthwhile. Okay, but of course, depending on how things are going to develop over here, right? If let's say from here, it starts to go back up correctively, right? This may build into something like this on the lower time frame where you can still look for the sell there. Okay, then that's another thing because your risk to reward ratio is going to be way better if you can get that move. Alright, so in terms of Elliott wave, what I'm looking at is simply, do I get a three-way structure for retracement entry? Alternatively, I use the breakout technique. So that's my take on the euro dollar side. Okay, as of now, really there isn't, right? However, if you got involved earlier, okay, I mean, if you manage to catch this part here, then yeah, because that's a three-wave move, right? But I did not get involved there, okay? If you kind of look into the fit, okay, that will be around that 1, 2, 3 area. Quite a bit of a drawdown as well. Okay, very close to a potential stop back then. Yeah, but that's not a trade I took. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so euro dollar. That's my take. Okay, analysis on BTC is clear. What's my suggestion to traders who doesn't have the time to consider the lower time frame? Stick to the higher time frame, right? I mean, the idea here is you doesn't necessarily need to. I mean, I'm looking at a H4 here, right? So you just need to wait for push up first, right? I mean, you don't need to keep looking at the charts, okay? You can look at it maybe 2 times a day. On the 4-hour time frame is more than enough, right? Because what you are waiting for, you're clear what you want to see, right? Basically for me, I want to see some kind of impulsive push. Okay, now this is on the 4-hour time frame, so for that to happen, it's not gonna happen in a few minutes or 1 or 2 hours, right? You need a 4-hour candle to look impulsive. Okay, we don't have a lot of 4 hours in a single day, right? So you don't need to kind of stare at the chart. And again, as I mentioned, in the morning, maybe you look at it once. In the evening, at night, you look at it once, and then that's about it, right? Two times a day. You want to just see basically the impulsive move, and once you have that, then right? The next thing you want to see is a corrective move. Okay, now the correction here may take time as well, right? So you have sufficient time to actually set things up, right? Because again, I'm sharing with you the analysis based on the 4-hour time frame. You don't need to be staring at your chart for entry. Okay, even if you go down to the hourly, right? You don't need to do it every other hour. Okay, you need to just wait for an impulsive move. Like once you get an impulsive move, okay, you have some kind of a time expectation technique, right? So the idea here is if this takes 2 hours or 4 hours, then this one will probably need another 4 hours or 8 hours to actually develop. Okay, so you have some kind of a time expectation that you can come back on the chart to confirm is the market giving you what you want. Okay, so you do not need to stare onto the chart every other hour. Cool. Okay, so I hope that kind of explained it. Okay, yeah. Good. So generally, those are the things I'm looking at the moment. Yeah. Okay. April has been a little bit tough for me personally, right? But we'll see how things goes into May. Anyway, this week here we are transiting into May, right? And for those of you who are familiar with the news trade strategy, NFP is something that you can definitely look into it once a month, right? You can actually use that particular data to trade the news. Okay, so that's all for me for today over here. I hope today's session give you an overview of the market, give you some ideas to work on in terms of where the opportunities that you may want to keep an eye on. Okay, and wishing all the very best for this week, and we'll see how the market develops. Okay, and reminder to of course manage your risk. Okay, so with that, we'll see you guys again in the future. Okay, all the best, and see you guys. Bye bye.